It's terrible to be taken and killed or put in prison, but to be disappeared is to be left with this big question mark. So forcible disappearance is definitely used as a tactic, as a weapon by not just governments, but also armed groups. It is a way not just of targeting a person, but also a community, their extended family, loved ones. If people are disappearing, it puts everyone in that community on alert that they could also be disappeared. That then also knocks onto the community, people around them not knowing and not having any answer and being usually unable to access justice mechanisms that under normal circumstances would give them an answer. With a disappearance, there's always a possibility that they're alive. And all of those unknowns can cause huge emotional stress and trauma to those who are trying to find them and looking for them. Pastor Aaron Mendez is another case we've worked on more recently. He was a pastor on the border of Mexico and the United States. So there's been a migrant issue for many, many years. And that tends to collect along the border as people come north and then they get to the border and for various reasons stop there before continuing on. Those areas are also some of the most dangerous areas because it's not just people moving, it's also groups moving drugs, arms, and other objects or other items across the border. In response to that, Christians, Catholic and Protestant, have set up shelters along the border. And Aaron Mendez was one of those pastors who had a refuge, a shelter. They were receiving refugees from all over the world, including among those groups were Cubans. Cubans are perceived by the criminal groups along the border as, in quotes, good targets for kidnapping. Criminal groups believe that Cubans tend to have relatives in America, in the United States, who have money. In terms of who they were going to target for kidnapping, Cubans are high on the list. And so they had come to the shelter before and had tried to break in to take the Cubans, and Pastor Mendez had stopped them. And a couple days later, the group came back and they took him and they took one of his managers and neither was ever seen again. There are assumptions that can be made about what's happened to him. It's now been a number of years and there's never been any real investigation into not just what happened to him, but who's responsible and why. It is a challenge. When there's reason to do so, we do hope. We currently have a case of 2 women in Nicaragua who were arrested, detained under really draconian circumstances last August, in August 2024. We believe we know where they are. In this case, we do have hope that they're alive, but there's been nothing given in terms of proof of life or even well-being to show that they're okay. We have some cases, for example, in Eritrea, of people who disappeared into the prison system sometimes more than 2 decades ago and could possibly be alive. We just saw the fall of the regime in Syria and prisons that were unknown and forgotten about, underground, being opened up and people coming out of them. So that does happen. It can happen. The most important thing is not letting those people be forgotten, holding these groups to account, asking where they are, pushing for those investigations, being the persistent widow, annoying the judge as much as possible until he finally gives justice. Prayer is that's always the first thing we hear from people. So knowing they're not alone, knowing that we won't tire with them. And then joining those advocacy efforts as well. Writing a letter of encouragement, writing a letter to the government or the embassy of whichever country it is, saying, where is this person? Again, reminding them that that person is not forgotten and won't be until answers are found.